Good evening, hockey fans, and welcome to episode number 3 of Pod Snipe Celly. Bit of a new look this week. We got the new intro, new background, new fonts, all of it looking great so far. My name is Dan Bradley. If you're just joining us, welcome to the show. We thank you for joining us on this wonderful Tuesday night. Alongside me is Joel Fernino. Joel, how you doing tonight?
Yeah, okay. Things aside, I am doing quite well. Thank you for asking, and thank you everyone for tuning in to episode 3. It's going to continue to get more surreal as those numbers crawl up.
It is.
And we got an interesting one for you.
We had a very lighthearted show planned for today's episode. And then we got some news out of Chicago, and that's kind of had to redirect the course of where we wanted today's podcast episode to go. For those who have not been following the news of what happened today, the firm of Jenner and Block completed their investigation into the Blackhawks organization regarding an alleged cover-up of sexual assault of one of their former players. And with the conclusion of their findings today and the publishing of their report, we find out that Stan Bowman is out as Chicago Blackhawks general manager. This happened during his first season. He is out as Blackhawks general manager. He's out as the general manager of USA Hockey, where he had been charged with constructing the Olympic hockey team. And first and foremost, Joel, I just want to get from you right off the bat your reactions to this, because you are a Chicago Blackhawks fan. That's your team. You've literally got the logo tattooed, on you. So this is personal for you. It's a weird day. How are you as a Blackhawks fan reacting to the news today?
There's a lot to unpack there. Obviously, we know me as kind of the comedic relief, but to start off on a serious note, it is an embarrassing and sad day to be a Blackhawks fan. There's no easy way, it's, the news today, we knew something was coming at some point here. It was both embarrassing, sad, infuriating, and I think most importantly, just completely avoidable, in my opinion. As a fan, from my perspective, and I think, we'll get into this, the fans, as affected as we are, we're not the important ones here. The victims are the most important here. But I will touch on how I'm doing, or, from the fans' perspective. But I think we would be remiss without prefacing the start of this episode with, since, this is pretty much going to take up a good chunk of our time.
A lot of the show, yeah.
Yeah, so I think I would be remiss if I didn't start it off by, for whoever is watching live, thank you for tuning in. For whoever watches the recording, thank you for watching the recording or listening to it on Spotify. Today's news, today's investigation results, everything that we're going to unpack today is not just tethered to the Blackhawks. It's not just tethered to the NHL. It's not just tethered to sports. It's a very widespread, unfortunate issue. That obviously today, in today's society, like, people are coming forward more now than in the past, and it's a sad truth that this stuff is happening, has happened, is happening across the organizations of every stature, sports organizations, companies, schools, you name it. And I think we'll touch on this more, and everything we say today is obviously going to be from the hockey perspective, but I'd be remiss without saying, at its core, hockey is a game. I get it. It is a lifestyle for hardcore fans that have hobbies and other things like you and I, and like the fan bases of all of our teams. It's a lifestyle for the players. It's a career for the players and staff. But at its core, it is a game. And with that game, between the players, staff, those players, those staff are human beings. They're not spokes in the wheel, even though we'll unpack some execs seem to think they are. They're not spokes in the wheel. They're not just assets. They are human beings, and they have feelings. And they, they mean something. They have aspirations. They have dreams, career goals, and it's just unfortunate to see just more of this happening. And it's just another file in the file cabinet of, I'm glad it was brought to light, and there's gonna, people are gonna see the justice they deserve, but it's a very overarching theme, and it spurs much further than just sports.
I think you're completely right on this, and I feel like as we watched the results unfold today on Twitter, watching through the press conference, watching immediate reactions, watching how the news broke and was reported, I feel like something that you said was really poignant there, that the human element in all of this, at the end of the day, this all happened because a human being was hurt.
Exactly.
They were a hockey player, they were a member of the Blackhawks organization, but they were a person first. And I think in all aspects of how we try and respond to this and react to this and cover it, it's so important to keep the human element of what happened in Chicago in mind. People's lives are permanently going to be changed because of all of this. It's not a fair situation in what happened, but I think today's efforts are a push to move things towards some sort of a fair resolution. Obviously, I don't know what fair is and what fair looks like. You don't know. We can speculate what we think.
Right.
But at the end of the day, it's only going to be as fair as it is in the eyes of the player involved. I think that's kind of the long and short of the matter. We'll look at this from a couple of different angles throughout the show tonight. But I want to start with kind of what this means for the ripple effect throughout the organization. We have general manager out, president of hockey operations out, all sorts of top to bottom just clearing house, to the point where I believe, and you can correct me if I'm wrong on this, that the only people who are still with the team from that time would be the owners, the Wirtzes, Jonathan Taves, and Patrick Kane. Other than that, is that everybody that's still within the Hawks organization who was there in 2010 when all of this went down?
Yeah, that's correct. It's, from a player's perspective, it's just Kane and Taves, and then from the exec perspective, it is just Rocky Wirtz, and the correction there too is Danny Wirtz, who has kind of taken a spearhead here of,
oh my goodness,
we got a big comment from my buddy Joe.
We'll get into this comment.
Joey, we will.
That was a
we will
bigger comment than I thought it was going to be. So Joel, you go ahead here, and then
I'm happy he tuned in. He's got some great takes. He talks to me all the time. I want to feature him. He's got some great commentary. But we'll get to that. So no, we'll get to that. Yeah, I mean, so Danny Wirtz has taken a bit of a kind of a more driver's seat to the owner's chair. He's kind of the CEO now. Rocky is kind of taking a little bit of a back seat as of I think it was, I want to say sometime in June of 2020. That's when Danny took his position, and that's why you saw him talking in the debriefing today, and Rocky was just kind of backing him. So for all intents and purposes, Danny was not involved in this whatsoever. I think he was only in high school back then, or college. So yeah, Rocky, of course the owner, Rocky Wirtz, and then just Taves and Kane.
And Taves and Kane were actually both added to COVID-19 protocol today, so they're away from the team today, which I don't know. It's unfortunate timing, because I wouldn't want to necessarily be with the team at the time that all of this is going down, when you're the leaders that Kane and Taves are. But I also don't think you'd want to be away from the team either. It's kind of a weird position for them to be in. There are some who will say that, oh, it's to try and shelter Kane and Taves from having to answer questions about this. I don't think that's the case. I think at some point, Kane and Taves are going to have to answer questions about this in a post-game presser and a day off press, some way, somewhere down the line. That's going to happen. So I think, especially when it comes to something health, I don't want to say, oh, this player's faking it or whatever, unless it's really, if a Vikings corner gets burned for a touchdown and then comes up pulling his hammy and he's back in 3 plays later, I'm going to say, yeah, he was dogging it, but that's a different situation.
Yeah, and I think too, to add to that, like they will, and they have to answer some questions inevitably, and they will. Jonathan Taves is that kind of captain. He's gonna say his piece, and he is going to address it internally. Obviously, there's going to be stuff he talks to the room internally. I mean, you saw the coach hand off the dry erase board in the game the other day against the Red Wings. So it's like, look, the players have much more of a voice right now than I think they ever have, right? At this current moment with the situation they're in of the losing streak to start the season. But Kane and Taves will definitely answer their questions. And I mean, I think it brings us to the reality too of like, we are still living in a pandemic, regardless of what happens here, good, bad, this type of investigation, a party, like whatever it is, we are in a pandemic, and the timing is always going to be weird, but you always want to keep player and personnel safety in mind first and foremost when it comes to COVID. And, Kane's been on the COVID list for a few days now, and now Taves just got added to it along with, and it was along with, Borgstrom as well. So it's not just them, like they're getting ravaged by COVID, and it's not even just the Blackhawks. The Bears are getting ravaged by COVID right now too. So it's just, I guess it's Chicago.
All right. I'm going to try and get Joey's comment back up here. And I'm going to do something just to see if this works and how this looks. No, that wasn't what I had in mind. That either. We'll just go back to like this. All right. So for those who are listening and not watching here, Joey's comment says, "The Hawks did the right things 10 years late. Makes me sick that this went on. As a diehard Blackhawks fan, I praise their rebuild and cup run. The organization was the best I had seen in my entire life, and the mantra 1 goal really was that, which is disheartening. 1 goal, no matter what comes up. I would gladly trade that cup win for opening this case up way back when." I think that's a really a great point from Joey there, and being able to look and say, hey, the organization royally screwed this up at just about every juncture that something could have gotten worse. It got worse. The report today just sickening as you read through the pages and infuriating. You find out that Brad Aldrich, who is currently in prison for a different sexual assault, that was of a high school hockey player in Michigan. After the first report of the assault to the Blackhawks, to their brass, to everybody that we heard was in that meeting today, after the Hawks had won the Stanley Cup, Aldrich had assaulted a 22-year-old intern with the team. So we get reports of that. We get reports of the recommendations of Aldrich for other positions, and personnel files missing from HR. This is just such an organizational failure. There's really no other word for it. And I think to that point, Hawks fans saying, yeah, we would trade that cup for making sure that this didn't happen. Absolutely, without a doubt. I think that has to be the take.
Yeah, I mean, I would resonate that as well. I would definitely trade that away to make sure that this is handled correctly. Like I mentioned at the beginning, hockey is just a game, and at this point, the executives involved, and we're going to get to that part of the story as well. They ultimately decided to take PR and a game over a human's, the human element here. And I think, Joey hit it on the head too. It's sickening. There's, this report is about 107 pages. I've been able to read through. At a busy day, I was able to read through a good 10, 15 pages of, what was most relevant, at least just to a fan.
And not an easy read either. That's a heavy read.
It's, it ranges from disgusting to infuriating and everything in between. And just baffling. The executives that were in that room, I think need to be highlighted the most here. Obviously outside of Aldrich, but
right,
he's he's
the
lowest
catalyst for all of this. Yes.
He is, and he is the lowest form of scum there can be, and he should be treated as such. But that goes without saying. But I don't think we can stress it enough. The executives, however, that were in that meeting that was reported to have happened on actually an hour after the Blackhawks had just clinched the Western Conference Final against the San Jose Sharks. It was reported that, after John Doe player had finally started to talk about what had happened. We're obviously not going to get into the details of what exactly happened. You can go read the report. It's out there. It's public for everyone to read. But the rumbling started to happen. He started telling who he needed to tell, and he had the courage to finally say something. And this meeting was held with, at the time, President John McDonough, new first-year general manager Stan Bowman, Al McIsaac was in there, Kevin Cheveldayoff was in that room. Who's the other one?
Coach Q.
No, hold on, I'm getting to that.
Okay.
But there was one other. I can't remember his name.
There are a couple other people in there. Let me try and find it here. But carry on.
Yeah. So there is also a man. They only named him as Gary. I think he was basically like I don't want to say the HR individual, but that representative in the organization, who basically all but told all the executives in that room, you need to take this to the police.
Jim Gary was
Jim
one of
Gary. That's it. Thank you, Jim Gary. And then there was one other executive, and I can't remember his name right now, but they were having this meeting talking about what they had heard, right? And I don't know what details they had, but they were talking about everything they had heard. And then literally, since the game had just ended an hour prior to this meeting, they then called for Joel Quenneville to come up to the room. But in the report, it states that he needed, the coach should know about this. This is his coaching staff. Get him up here now. And I think Quenneville was even quoted as saying it was very unusual to get called up to a meeting, an hour after a game, let alone a Western Conference Final clinching game. So, then when he went up there, and then it was also stated in the report that exactly Stan Bowman and Joel Quenneville both had stressed, we need to, the hardships of how it was getting to the Stanley Cup Final, and we need to focus on the team first and then address this later. And then by the end of it, John McDonough had reportedly said that he will handle it, and then everything else explodes from there. That room has left one of the biggest stains. Obviously, we know what Aldrich did. But that room, with how they handled it, has left one of the biggest stains on not just the Chicago Blackhawks franchise, but Chicago sports.
I would take that one step further and say even the NHL and professional sports as we know it.
Yeah, there were some reports that I didn't see any. I haven't gotten that far into the report itself, but there are now some reports that a representative at the time of the NHLPA didn't do anything about it either.
Don Fair, the head,
yes.
Who Fair, who is largely responsible for lockouts and the disputes between players and owners. Much of that comes down to Gary Bettman and Don Fair. So that the next point, I guess, as we look at the ripple effect that this has throughout the league, is what does this mean for those other personnel? What does it mean for Don Fair? What does it mean for Gary Bettman? Does he need to make amends for this happening on his watch. And that's where I want to go next, is in specific regards to Joel Quenneville, who is now the head coach of the Florida Panthers, Kevin Shoveldayoff, who is now the general manager of the Winnipeg Jets. What, if anything, should be the consequences for Quenneville and for Shoveldayoff?
I mean, I think it's probably a pretty simple consequence there. I think, and coming from a fan's perspective, Joel Quenneville is a living legend here. We were putting him on the Chicago coach Mount Rushmore with Ditka, with, wow, that name just
Phil Jackson, Chicago
Phil
Bulls.
Jackson, thank you. Wow,
I knew where you were going with that.
I hope none of my Bulls fans are gonna my Bulls fans.
Oh, you're gonna get it, buddy. You're gonna get it.
We put him up there with Phil Jackson, Mike Ditka, in a way, Joe Madden, right? We were putting him up there with all those names, and Ozzie Guillen, and I think. I think it really it's the harshest thing that needs to happen, right? Like they were in the room, right? Quenneville may have came in late, so who's to say he didn't get all the details he needed and he had other focuses? But I still think that if we're going to change how these things get handled, and if we're going to really truly put the hammer down on scenarios that pop up like this, you got to fire both of them. The Florida Panthers and the Winnipeg Jets have to relieve them of their duties. I probably ASAP. I know Gary Bettman has released a statement that he is going to have personal one-on-one meetings with both of them on separate calls and review this. And, I saw today that the Florida Panthers declined to say anything about it. All they did was release that. Yeah, of course, understandably.
They got to wait till they wade through all the
muck with
the report. And,
yeah. So, I mean, I think it's plain and simple. They should be relieved of their duties. And, what happens after that, I think branches off of, our knowledge of the legal system and all that. Like we don't really know. So we got Joey with another comment. I like it. I got you this time, Joey. So from Joey, we saw it with Bowman and the hockey ops here. All parties involved need to be fired. Makes you wonder if this is why the Hawks parted with McDonough and Q. So that is a good point, and I'm glad you touch on that, Joey. I've been reading into a lot of that as well. There's a lot of speculation, like, is there a reason they parted with John McDonough? Is that the reason they parted with Q? I actually lean on the side of no, that's not why they parted with both of them. As we know, and I'm not going to, we'll save this for 2 minutes for roughing down the road for me. But, as we know, Stan Bowman did not see eye to eye with Joel Quenneville in the later years of his tenure. And I think it was, the same can be said with John McDonough. But with Q, he was ultimately fired because, and I still believe this, that, Bowman wanted his yes man and Quenneville was not his yes man. He fired him. So I don't think Q's firing had absolutely anything to do with this. Maybe more comes out and that's not the case, but I don't think that was the case at all, personally. And then with John McDonough, I actually read into this earlier today that, and again, of course, people are going to speculate the same thing because John McDonough was just relieved of his duties, I believe, 2 years ago now. With John McDonough, he actually more so was relieved of his duties by Rocky, actually, and Danny and I think Danny when he got his job, but by Rocky because when COVID hit, he basically was not in the right headspace to figure out how to handle the comeback from the blow that all the COVID shutdowns caused. And he had not come back with a plan. I don't even know if he came back with a plan at all, but he came, whatever plan he came back with, Rocky Wirtz was just not seeing eye to eye with that plan to come back from the blow that COVID caused. So that ultimately led to, them relieving John McDonough of his duties. And then, of course, as soon as John McDonough got relieved of his duties, Danny, the son of Rocky, was then promoted right into his position.
So I want to ask you this. I'm looking at a poll here on Twitter from an account that is very much worth a follow, at JFreshHockey. Does all sort of stuff with hockey analytics, charts, breakdowns, player cards, all this kind of stuff. It's just incredible stuff that he puts together. He's got a poll on his Twitter right now with the question of what will happen to Joel Quenneville. Poll has just under 6,000 votes. It's at 58.95 and counting.
Okay.
What will happen to Quenneville? And the options are steps down, fired by Panthers, suspended by the NHL, or nothing. And 51.5% of the people responding to this poll say nothing.
Wow.
I think that speaks volumes about how hockey fans are perceiving this, as to how the perception of the league is that they don't take discipline seriously. The other thing that we haven't even mentioned yet is that in addition to all of these firings, is that the league has fined the Chicago Blackhawks $2 million as a result of this. And it was brought up earlier today that that's less than what they fined the New Jersey Devils for signing Ilya Kovalchuk's contract.
Yep.
That's less than the salary cap recapture penalty for Vancouver on the Roberto Luongo contract. What is the takeaway here? Is that the league has been soft in the past? Is there a time where they're going to get tough on all of this? I mean, it really, as a fan, I'm having a hard time making sense of where the league goes from here. I mean, if more than half the fans, and obviously this doesn't account for all hockey fans, but a poll of 6,000 hockey fans and more than 50% agree on something, that's unheard of in hockey. But you would have more than 51% of fans on that 4-answer poll saying that they don't think the NHL is going to, or that the Panthers specifically are going to do anything here. In either regard, I think it speaks volumes about where the league is at in preventing these sorts of situations from happening again.
No, I completely agree. And I mean, obviously, I think we've seen over the years, regardless of what the issue is, we've had the racial slur issues of fans and such, or of coaches too. We've had the bullying things of, whether it's coaches, players. We've seen like the ramifications of all these actions across the entire spectrum of what we consider, what we know to be horrible. There's no consistency to it. Contractual based stuff with, Ilya Kovalchuk. It's like,
it's a tough comparison. It's not
exactly.
It's not even apples to oranges. It's apples to lunch
Steak.
boxes, steak, whatever you want to.
Literally.
They're not the same. And I understand the sentiment of not being the case. I don't know, when you look at it in that vacuum of the $3 million fine for the Devils and $2 million for the Blackhawks here. In that context, it just doesn't seem right.
No, and I agree. But I will offer a bit of a alternate perspective. My mind thought about this when I saw, the comparison of the 2 million versus that 3 million recently, and only, $2 million to an organization that's worth north of, $1 billion.
Yes, billion. They're in the billions of dollars as a franchise.
Yeah, exactly. So I mean, that's like you and me paying a parking ticket. But anyway, I think not the alternate, but the one perspective I did think about this is that the NHL did have to step in and find the organization, and the organization at its core, it is a name at this point in time in 2021. Rocky Wirtz as the owner, of course, you need to, and obviously Danny Wirtz now kind of taking the front seat. Whether they didn't know, and I do truly believe they didn't know. However, they are the owners of this organization. They are the Mark Zuckerberg of the Blackhawks, right? Like, they are the owners and CEOs of this company. All these sports teams, they are at their core, they are a company, just like Facebook, Google, Amazon. You name it, right? They are a company. And I think they, as the owners, did the right thing with who they fired. You know, they came flat out and said, look, anybody, we're not going to name every single name, but everybody who was with the team in 2010 that still remains here in 2021 is gone and will never be back. That's step one. It's kind of an expected step, right? You need to do that.
When you say won't be back, do you mean within the Blackhawks organization, or do you mean within the NHL? Because Gary Bettman has left the door open for that and said that anyone involved, he'll have the ultimate authority on that to decide whether or not they're allowed back in. But I think in saying that, he hasn't totally closed the door on this and come down hard.
Oh, I agree. And we'll get to that. When it comes to the Blackhawks, though, no, they will never be back. No, yeah, that is a huge. I'm glad you said that because I wanted to touch on that. So,
all right, but Blackhawks specifically, your point.
Yeah, so Blackhawks specifically. So that was step one, and I will, I think we all know here, like you mentioned, I diehard fan through and through. My buddy Joey here, who's watching the show, diehard fan through and through. We will bleed Blackhawks until the day we die. And that's not going to change from this unfortunate and, just embarrassing situation. However, they are going to have to do a lot of cleaning up. There isn't just step 1, 2, 3, done. There is step 1, 2, 3, A, B, C, all the way to Z, all the way to 100. They have to do so much to clean this up. But step 1 was firing the remainder of the trash that were here. And I'm going to use the word trash very vocally. So, from that perspective, that I'm getting to here is that they find the Blackhawks organization, but ultimately everyone there's no one left there's no one left there that was directly responsible for this that really truly gets punished by a fine, right? The league can fine
it hurts the owners as the team
exactly
because it's their team and it happened on their watch, but
exactly, and they should still have consequences as well. And again, like I said, I believe them when they say they were never told; it was kept from them. But it is still their team. They have to face the repercussions because stuff like this, stuff as extreme as this, starts at the top. So you have to be punished in some way. And I think the league, maybe it was a PR stunt too, right? Like they're like, well, there's nobody left there to punish really that directly caused this or covered this up, but we still have to lay down a hammer, even if it's a styrofoam hammer. We still got to do something to, say like, look, this happened under your nose. You didn't see it. You didn't turn the wrong way or anything, but you didn't see it. So that's kind of my other perspective, where it's like they're punishing them, but they're really they're punishing the organization that has no one left that's involved anymore. So I'm wondering if that's why you didn't see maybe a higher penalty, like in the tens of millions, right? Or you didn't see like a forfeit of draft picks or anything like that. Because I think it's kind of one of those things where it's like this may have not been your fault directly, but now you have to live with the consequences, and you have a lot of work to fix that and gain the trust back of the fan base, gain the trust back of the league, and gain the trust back of, most importantly, your current and future players and current and future staff.
Absolutely.
So I think that's is that the perspective that I think is gospel? No, it's just it was a thought that popped into my head where I was like, there's no one left to punish that harshly, right? So I think the league just had to do something.
I agree, and I think I haven't seen. I got the notification that the league was fining the Hawks $2 million. What I haven't seen yet is, where is that $2 million going? Is that going to the player assistance fund, which is normally when you see big organizational fines, that's generally where it goes, is a players assistance fund, so that it goes to help players who maybe were injured while playing the game and it ended their careers. The families, for example, of in those types of situations. What I would love to see is this going to a maybe some sort of sexual assault survivors legal fund, something where there is a proactive benefit here, and maybe the Hawks take it upon themselves to say, okay, we're going to pay this $2 million fine to the league. That goes to the players fund. But in addition to that, this is what we are going to do. We are going to donate $2 million to sexual assault survivors assistance funding and legal funding to help out in that regard. I would like to see something like that. And as you touched on a minute ago, it's not a be all end all. They pay that money and all this goes away.
Mm-hmm.
But that's a gesture that would show me that, hey, we are serious about making this change. We are serious about our response to this organizationally. And this is one step that we are going to take to show you that we're serious about it and regain that trust.
So I'm actually glad you mentioned that, because they actually did do something like that.
Oh, we got comment from Joey here. Yeah,
Yes,
$1 million of the $2 million is going to fund local organizations around Chicago that provide support and assistance to survivors of sexual abuse. Joey, thank you again for Joey. You've been a rock star
you just took the words right out of my mouth, man.
Joey, yes. we appreciate you, and we appreciate those of you who are watching as well and listening to this as well. It's a heavy episode, and we're a viewer driven show. That's what we want to be, is talking about the things that our audience cares about. I think we've kind of touched on everything that we need to touch on here. So with these, we got about 20-ish minutes left of the show. We're going to kind of segue into, and this is the hardest type of segue to have to make, is out of something like this. But
right,
we're going to do it. We'll go 5 seconds, just dead air. We'll let it breathe, and then we'll go on to the next bit.
And we'll touch on it towards the end again, and we'll put a bow on it for now, and I'm sure there's going to be more to come.
All right. So with that, let's move into this season and what is going on the ice right now. Okay. We've got all sorts of just bonkers scenarios around the league. We've got the San Jose Sharks, who are 4-1. We've got the Sabres, who are 4-1-1, I think.
Yeah.
And then we've got teams that were supposed to be powerhouse clubs just in trouble. The Tampa Bay Lightning 2-3-1. The Toronto Maple Leafs 2-4-1. Which of those two teams is in more trouble? Joel, we'll start with you on this one. Who's in more trouble, Tampa Bay or Toronto?
I think the easy choice for me is Toronto. And I think I'll get it out of the way. Tampa Bay's won 2 back-to-back Stanley Cups. There's always going to be some sort of fall off. My opinion, there is some sort of hangover, right? And, they lost arguably their best player in Nikita Kucherov. But, they got their 2 back-to-back Stanley Cups. Of course, they're in trouble because they are off to a horrible start, and one that no one really expected, because they pretty much brought back the same team virtually. But I think the Toronto Maple Leafs are in much more trouble here, because I will argue to say that their fan base is much harsher on them than the Tampa Bay fan base.
They're throwing jerseys on the ice in Toronto.
They're throwing jerseys on the ice. 5
days into the season, they're throwing jerseys on the ice.
And the thing is while Tampa Bay is, of course, continuing to be that perennial Stanley Cup, one of the Stanley Cup favorites, Toronto in recent years, last maybe 2 years, and especially coming into this year, were a Stanley Cup favorite to come out of the East. And they are not living up to it whatsoever. And especially when you have all that star power, what are you doing? You're again, they're young, but they're literally wasting this star power. And I think that they just, who's more in trouble, to me, it's got to be the Maple Leafs. They have much more to prove here than the Tampa Bay Lightning have.
I'm going to respectfully disagree on this one. I think that Tampa Bay is in more trouble here, and here's why. For one, they're not even the best team in their own state anymore. The Florida Panthers, undefeated. That's going to be tough to deal with when they're not even the best in their own state. And yeah, the Lightning have a bigger fan base, but it's starting to even out a little bit now that the Panthers are competitive again. Toronto, the biggest difference between Toronto and Tampa Bay right now is health. as a factor, and the Maple Leafs are healthy and the Lightning aren't. One point I want to bring up here is goals allowed. Andrei Vasilevsky is one of the top goaltenders in the league, if not the top goaltender in the league, and especially with Carey Price being out, and look at what happened to Montreal. Vasilevsky is so good when he is on his game, but he has played more games, I believe, than any other goaltender, including regular season and playoffs over the last 3 years, than anybody else. That wear and tear starts to add up, and it has an effect of more than just the one season. That's why the hardest thing to do after winning a championship is to go win the next one the next year. It's rare in hockey to see back-to-back champions. We saw it in 2020 and 2021 with the Lightning. We saw it 2016 and 17 with the Pittsburgh Penguins. But that's been it until you go back, into the 90s, I believe, with the Red Wings winning back-to-back in the late 90s was the last time a team won back-to-back. It doesn't happen.
And the last three-peat we saw would have been it's the 70s Islanders, right? Or is it the 80s Islanders?
80 to 83.
Yeah.
My dad was a huge New York Islanders fan in that era. And
rightfully so back then.
That was a good Islanders team.
Oh, yeah.
But I think it's got to be Tampa Bay that's in more trouble here, because beyond the wear and tear, it's future of the organization as well. This could have a lingering effect into next season, because they're gassed right now. They're not playing sound hockey. They lost quite a bit of talent. Tyler Johnson was playing really well with Tampa Bay. He went to Chicago, hasn't quite found his footing there yet.
Got his first goal the other night.
Yanni Gourde is off to Seattle in the expansion draft.
Yep.
They lost David Savard to free agency. They're in a tough spot. They're in a tough division, and they're going to have to battle with Toronto to get back to the playoffs. I think there's more pressure on Toronto right now to be good, given the nature of the team. But the team that's in more trouble, to me, is Tampa Bay.
I think it's funny too that I like that you talked about, like, they're going to have to battle each other to get back to the. Oh, we got a comment from HP. We'll get to that in a second. I wanted to quickly. I liked what you mentioned about they're going to have to battle each other, and I'm looking at their records. You got 2-3-1 for Tampa, and then you got 2-4-1 for Toronto, and they're both sitting at a -10 goal differential, both of them. Exactly. So it's kind of one of those things where every time they match up, at least early on now, it's going to be that something's got to give matchup, but from a negative perspective as opposed to a positive perspective of two juggernauts hitting each other. We can get to HP's comment now.
Yeah, go ahead. Okay, so HP, Toronto, because of lack of depth. Tampa is absolutely pumping the Penguins right now, looking like good old Tampa. It's 3-0 Tampa Bay in that game. Tampa coming off a bad loss against the Buffalo Sabres, who we asked last week a little bit, are the Sabres legit? And I said no. I'm not sold on them yet, but they're starting to prove the haters wrong a little bit here.
I mean, they got a chip on their shoulder, right? They lost their captain is sitting out indefinitely, right? And I think inevitably
their captain is playing. It's Eichel's not the captain anymore.
Oh, that's right. They stripped him. That's right.
Mm-hmm.
Well, their old captain is sitting out, and their best player is sitting out right now, and we'll see where that goes. But I agree with HP, and I think it's a good thing. To your point too, depth and health. I mean, health is probably the biggest thing why Tampa is sure in trouble. But health comes back. They can get their wheels back as well. They might be gassed, but as the season drags on, they can get their legs back under them and they can get back into it. Also, not to go back to the heavy part of the episode, but what happens with the fallout of, this whole thing with Joel Quenneville, that could really shake things up for the first place Florida Panthers.
Mess up Florida. Yeah, exactly. That's a good point too.
You get a coaching change mid-season when you're on a tear, that is not good for anybody.
No,
not just systems, but a voice in the locker room too. Now that's not to say I still think Florida is the real deal, and I think they're going to continue. I agree with you. They're going to be right in that conversation this year for sure. But you rip a coach out from underneath them, I don't know, something that's not going to go well. But yeah, no, I think you kind of said it yourself. It's health versus depth, and HP really hit it on the head there. It's health versus depth, and obviously Tampa is going to continue to remain as deep as they can be. I think the only deeper teams you got here probably, well, the only deeper teams you really have are in the West anyway, with, Colorado and Vegas and such. But even both of those teams aren't looking as good as they should be right now either.
It's amazing that with the picks that Tampa Bay has traded away over the past few years to stockpile assets and build that depth, excuse me, they move those picks when they're going all in for a cup, and yet they still have one of the deepest prospect pools in the league. They can run 4 lines, on a nightly basis, and any line can step up and be the heroes. I'm looking at the box score of this Tampa Bay game tonight. Goal scorers are Braden Point, Andre Palat, and Ryan McDonough. So when you're getting goals out of your defense, anytime you're able to do that, that's a good thing.
That list of names you just said too, like that just proves the depth that they have.
Right.
You mentioned
is out. Stamkos doesn't have a point tonight, but
Stamkos has finally fallen off, but he's still their
But he
captain.
hasn't,
He's still
though.
that voice.
He hasn't, though. He's got 10 points on the season. 10 points through 5 games.
That's pretty good.
He's getting it done early and stepping up with Kucherov out.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I mean, it's funny too. You mentioned the draft picks and stuff. I mean, hey, you got to give it to their scouts, man. Like, look at Braden Point. Here's a trivia question. Do not Google it. You have 5 seconds to answer this.
Okay.
What number overall was Braden Point drafted? And bonus points if you guess what year.
Well, I do actually know this. He was a 3rd round pick. I want to say he was late 80s, early 90s overall, because the Minnesota Wild had the pick that was used to select Braden Point, and they traded down 1 spot. Tampa Bay takes Braden Point, and the Wild drafted Louis Belpedio.
Who?
In that spot. Yep, exactly. No, Belpedio is good, but I think his ceiling is as a career AHLer. He's nowhere near Braden Point.
Right.
Just where it's at. So thank you for bringing that up and reminding me that the Wild could have had Braden Point and had the first line, true number 1 center that the organization has lacked for most of the entirety of their franchise. So thanks for that.
You are welcome. And your answer, it was the 2014 draft, and he was 79th overall.
79th. Okay.
But even still,
I knew it was somewhere in late 70s, early 80s, something like that.
Somebody that good, 79th overall, your scouts are doing their job.
We're going to try something a little new here on the show, and we're going to take a look at a couple of games that are coming up later this week. And in fact, both of these are games that are tomorrow, and taking a look at the odds on these 2 games and offering our take on a pick. Boston Bruins plus 110 at Florida Panthers minus 130. Panthers undefeated. Boston is 3-1 on the season. Joel, give me your pick on that game. Who you got between Boston and Florida?
Florida all the way.
I hate that I'm going to do this, but I'm going to go Boston.
I can see why you would do that. I mean, if there's going to be a team to play spoiler to one of the few remaining undefeated teams, I could see Boston doing it. But I don't know, man. I think Florida's on a heater, and I think they're going to maximize it. And also, Boston's a good team, but they've escaped maybe 1 or 2 of their games.
Perhaps. I think the big thing with Florida is going to be what they do with Quenneville.
I agree, but we're not going to know by tomorrow.
Could be a factor, right? We won't know that tonight. We'll probably find out more tomorrow what Florida ultimately decides to do. But I think that's going to be just such a distraction hanging either way. The uncertainty of it could be a factor. And don't get me Florida was my pick. I made it on the show 2 weeks ago. Florida's going to win the cup this year. That's my pick.
Yeah.
And I'm riding with them the whole way. But I think for tomorrow, that could be trouble.
I agree. No, I definitely agree, and I can see it. I just think I got to ride the hot hand if I'm putting money on this one.
All right, and second one, Vegas Golden Knights minus 115 at Dallas Stars minus 105. Those are some surprisingly close odds, given where Vegas and Dallas have been over the last couple of years. But Vegas struggling to begin the season. No Alex Tuck, no Max Pacioretty, no Mark Stone. Martinez is hurt. Zach Whitecloud is hurt. But then you look at Dallas, they're down Jason Robertson. He called a runner-up last season. And Dallas can't score right now. Joel, who are you taking in this one?
You know what? Smart money. Probably Dallas. All you need to do is look at the standings and see, Dallas, they can't score right now, but they are still 3-3. They're sitting, in that third seed in the Central right now. And they can't score, but you just named it, man. Look at Vegas's decimation of injuries. They have virtually nobody. They are on the fact that Vegas sits at 1-4 with a -9 goal differential, which is very interesting with that defense that they have. I still think, and it was kind of my pick too. I have Vegas at least making the Western Conference Final again, but they need to get their stuff together here. I don't know if it happens tomorrow night, though.
You know what? I'm going to take Vegas here just to be different. But
wow.
Holy smokes, is Braden Holtby off to a great start in Dallas after how bad he's been his last year with the Capitals, last season with Vancouver. He was putting up terrible numbers. And this year he's got a goals against below 2 and a save percentage over .930. I mean, he's feeling it right now and playing well. But something about Vegas, man. I mean, Vegas has had a difficult schedule out of the gates here, and I mean, they opened the season at home, hosting the Seattle Kraken, but since then at the Kings, which was just a weird fluky game. That was a 6-2 loss. A loss 3-1 against the St. Louis Blues, undefeated. A loss against the Edmonton Oilers, who are undefeated.
Yep.
And shutout loss 2-0 against the New York Islanders, who are one of the top defensive teams in the league. Sorokin with back-to-back shutouts in net. Like, that's a good Islanders team, and that's kind of a tough gamut to run. And even right now, Vegas is playing Colorado. It's 2-0 Vegas at the end of the first. So Vegas is still a good team here. They've just had a tough go of it. I think I'm going to go Vegas here.
Oh, absolutely. And I think you mentioned you're picking Vegas to be different. I actually picked Dallas to be different. I think the smarter play is to go Vegas. But I think if you're from a betting perspective,
I could see that.
Yeah, from a betting perspective, when it's I think you're supposed to say plus 105, right? But like,
no, it is.
It's minus. Oh,
it is minus 105. It's that close right now on the.
So that would mean
on the lines. That's
they're
borderline even money. Vegas is still the favorite, but
that's what I thought. Okay, so I guess
close.
Yeah, that's fair. So I guess
because the next way that line would shift would be both would be minus 110, and then you're looking even money.
That's fair. Even still, though, I think from the money perspective, if you're going to take the quote unquote dog, this is probably the dog to take just because of the timing of it all.
All right, and one last question for tonight. This one not a betting pick. This one just looking into the crystal ball, putting on your fortune-telling hat, Magic 8 Ball, give it a shake, see what you think. Who is going to be the last unbeaten team to fall? There's 4 left: the Blues, the Hurricanes, the Oilers, and the Panthers. I don't believe any of them are playing tonight. Let me check that real quick. None of the undefeated teams are playing tonight. So with those 4, Blues, Hurricanes, Oilers, Panthers, which of those teams will be the last of the unbeatens?
Man, that is tough. Because there's so many different factors going into each of those. We have the Panthers, with whatever happens with Q, right?
Mm-hmm.
That could definitely put a damper on keeping your undefeated season alive. We have the Oil. I would say the Oilers are up there for me to be one of the last ones remaining, but will their defense continue to hold up, and will their goaltending continue to hold up? Long term, I think it will, but to remain undefeated, it's tough to say. The Hurricanes are on a heater. They're going off, and you know what? As much as it kills me deep inside to say, I think the Blues are going to be the the last one standing here for undefeated teams. I don't think it's going to be too much further ahead of, in my opinion, the Oilers. I think it's going to be kind of a neck and neck between the Oilers and the Blues. Oilers strictly because of the scoring. I mean, they're doing what Toronto clearly can't do correctly, and that's not have as much defense, but our scoring's making up for it, so it's cool. The Blues, I mean, Jordan Binnington is Jordan Binnington. I have him in both of my fantasy leagues. He's a star. I mean, he's gonna win the Vezina at some point here in the next couple of years, I'm thinking.
Okay, that's a bold take. I'm gonna write that.
No, not this year. Not this year.
Well, even within the next couple of years, I don't know if he's quite to that level yet.
Not yet. I think you'll see him be at least in that conversation in the next couple of years. But
right, let me throw this at you. Next 4 games here and see if this changes your mind. For the Panthers, tomorrow hosting Boston rather.
Yep.
Friday at Detroit, Saturday at Boston, and then they're off until the following Thursday against Washington, and potentially 5 games down the road, you could have unbeaten Florida, unbeaten Carolina.
Okay.
Looking at the Hurricanes, their next 5: Boston, Chicago, Arizona, Chicago, Florida.
Well, they got 2 victories against us there.
St. Louis, home against Colorado, then Chicago, Los Angeles, St. Louis, Anaheim, and then Edmonton, home against Philly, road against Vancouver, home against Seattle, home against Nashville, home against the Rangers.
I think you just proved my point a little bit. It sounds like the Blues and the Oilers have the easiest path.
All right, I'm gonna go Oilers. You went Blues. I'm gonna go Oilers there. I think those really are kind of the two, and that's not to say that those are necessarily the 2 best teams of that bunch. I think the Panthers and Hurricanes are better teams than the Blues and the Oilers. But at least for the sake of this unbeaten streak to begin the season, it's a little more favorable schedule wise for the Blues and the Oilers here. Blues, I think, are going to end up finishing 3rd in the Central Division. I do think Colorado is going to bounce back. I think it's going to be a dogfight with Dallas and Minnesota in there as well. Blues, I could see falling off a little bit, but they're playing really, really great hockey to start the season.
Oh, yeah.
And Edmonton, Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl are just so good at hockey. Like, it's honestly unfair.
It's true. I mean, that's kind of why it's like, how do you beat that? I mean, obviously you got to have sound defense to beat that, but even then, they're still too good. They still figure out a way.
Alrighty, Joel, you are no longer in school. I am no longer in school. We graduated already, but I am going to give you some homework here. And this comes courtesy of it might as well be our 3rd host of the show today, and that's Joey. Joey has a spicy take that he wants to share with us. And we're not going to have time to get into it tonight, but this is something that is going to be a point of conversation at some point on this show in the near future. Spicy take: Mike Modano better than Patrick Kane for best American-born player. All-around player versus a guy who never plays defense. Joey, you have no idea how happy it makes me to see Joel's brain firing so fast to come up with an angry yet nuanced response to that take. I agree, and Joel and I have had this conversation before. I'm a Modano guy, and Joel is a Kaner. I mean, it just is. That's where he's at with it. It's his hometown team. He's got to go with Kaner, but we are absolutely going to get into that at some point on this show in the near future. But Joey, we did want to give you one more shout out and one more thank you for all of your help with the show tonight. That is it for our show. Thank you so much for joining us here on Pod Snipe Celly, brought to you by the Sports 2.0 Network and Noop Sports. They've been so helpful to us in getting this podcast off the ground. Thank you to RJ for all your work on our videos for the week. Stay tuned. We'll be back next Tuesday at 8:00 p.m. For more of our content Eastern. Here. Yep, 8 o'clock
Don't
Eastern.
forget our
Yes,
Central
okay.
Time buddies.
Okay, 7 Central. I'll make sure to say
Yeah, come on now.
8 o'clock Eastern, 7
You
Central.
Eastern Time people.
Find us on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, and on Twitch. You can also listen on demand on Spotify and on any iTunes platform, Apple Podcasts, however you want to listen that way. For Joel, for Nino, I am Dan Bradley. Enjoy the rest of your night, everybody.